Is it time for Ukraine to try and reconquer Crimea? Yes. An opportunity presents itself, you see. A chance for great rewards and potentially equally great risk. As many of you probably already know, Crimea was taken away from Ukraine by Putin's little green men in 2014 as a Russian response to the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity, which resulted in the ousting of the Russian-leaning president Viktor Yanukovych. Russia initially denied any involvement with the Little Green Men, claiming instead they were local Ukrainian patriots rising up against Western and in particular American imperialistic interference in the sovereign affairs of Ukraine. And as they were, of course, but local self-defense units, Russia had no authority over them. The entire world was dumbstruck. "But they themselves say they are Russians. Look, we have video evidence," said every single Western statesman at the time. Even as Putin simply covered his ears and said that Russian army uniforms could be bought in any old store. And coincidentally, shortly thereafter, 96% of Crimea's population voted to rejoin Russia. Winky dinky winky indeed. Putin would later admit to having sent troops to Crimea, but only to stop violence committed by ultra-nationalist forces. Ah yes, the my opponent is a Nazi argument. A favorite tool of Twitter users and politicians alike, as it turns out. But now, Ukraine may have an opportunity to right that wrong. With the battle for Kiev ending in a decisive Russian defeat, a window has been created by the retreat of several major Russian army formations. To the north of Kiev, the 35th and 36th Combined Arms armies are pulling back rapidly to avoid encirclement. And some reports are even suggesting the 35th and the 36th are already out of Ukraine, with Ukrainian troops having supposedly reached the Belarusian border. To the northeast, the 41st Combined Arms Army has given up its attempts to surround and reduce the city of Chernihiv, in which Ukrainian troops have been captured since the first few days of the war. The city may now be but a few days or even possibly hours away from being relieved by advancing Ukrainian troops from Kiev. And worse yet is the state of the 2nd Guards Combined Arms Army, which appears now to be in a full rout, fleeing back towards the Russian border. In the terms of the Russian General Staff, this is a redeployment of troops. Or we might alternatively describe it in perhaps more apt conventional military terms like a headlong flight, for example, as the Russian army appears to be in the midst of withdrawing all of its soldiers out of the northern parts of Ukraine. Now, this may not necessarily be a good thing for Ukraine in the long run. It depends on a variety of factors, as the withdrawal and the reorganization of troops is precisely what I think Russia should be doing right now. And indeed what I suggested as well, though not to quite this degree. I was thinking that the Russian troops might withdraw where needed and dig in elsewhere to keep Ukrainian troops tied down. Instead, we have seemingly seen a full-scale disengagement of 4 major Russian armies. And to be fair, and to give credit where credit is due, I was not at all sure that Putin would be willing to agree to a large-scale retreat from Kiev, as it seemed like he'd put quite a bit of prestige on the line to capture the city and a large portion of the Ukrainian cabinet in doing so. But the 35th and 36th appear to have both managed to extricate themselves from what was very nearly a major encirclement there in relatively good order. And not a day too soon either, as, again, Ukrainian troops are claiming to have taken back positions on the Belarusian border just a day or so ago. And whilst, of course, the withdrawal of these major formations from northern Ukraine is a military defeat and a humiliation for the Russian army, it is nothing in comparison to the loss of face they would have experienced if the 35th Army had actually been caught, captured, and destroyed. By doing this, Russia has given Ukraine a tactical victory, a local victory, but it has denied them a truly telling strategic victory. It was absolutely the correct decision, as these men and materiel would be far more valuable right now in the Donbass-Luhansk area, which is still balanced on a knife's edge. The last 2 weeks has seen slow and unsteady advances made by the Russian side, but advances nevertheless that place a significant portion of the Ukrainian army in grave danger. I have noted it before and I will note it again, one unexpected breakthrough on that front can doom Ukraine overnight. And with tens of thousands of troops relieved from the north, they will pose a very real danger once redeployed. And bear in mind too that whilst Russia can move its units quite freely, Ukraine cannot. Just because Kiev is no longer attacked does not mean that the northern border can be abandoned, as Belarus is most certainly not a neutral party in all of this. On the bright side, however, we are reaching the point where a lot of Ukraine's reserves can finally be mobilized, and hopefully a lot of the task of guarding borders and less exposed areas can be handed over to them, whilst the now properly veteran brigades can be moved over to other tasks and more pressing areas. However, though optimism should always be tempered with caution, this may be Ukraine's last and best opportunity to score a truly decisive win. One on an even grander scale than the now seemingly lost opportunity to encircle the 35th Combined Arms Army. And that opportunity is, of course, Crimea. Because as big of a deal as I have made of the now soon-to-be 4 armies in Russia's reserves, the truth of the matter is that these are badly bruised formations that will need a lot of refitting, reorganization, and supply to get back to strength after their withdrawal from Ukraine. It will be a strenuous task as well to move 4 armies worth of men and materiel, along with logistics and support, into new positions in and around the Donbass-Luhansk area. I would wager the process would take a month at least, and probably 2, maybe even 3, for all of this to be made ready, depending on the state of the armies withdrawn and whether or not the Russian command staff has been properly laying the groundwork in the background for this major troop redistribution. In military terms, even 3 months is certainly not an ocean of time, and Ukraine will have to do some major reorganization of its own, but a victorious army never tires. And I imagine the troops around Kiev are chomping at the bits right about now for another go at the invader. So, let us finally zoom out at the map here and have a look at the crazy plan. Make no mistake, this is a risky one. Crimea is practically the only place where the Russian Federation has seen some real success, a fact I ascribe to 3 factors mostly. Surprise! Ukraine probably was not expecting a major drive out of Crimea, considering the obvious terrain challenges involved. The elite nature of the invasion, there are 2, possibly 3 elite naval infantry brigades in the area, alongside another possible 3 to 4 air assault brigades, and finally, size. With elements of 4 motorized rifle divisions, it was a tremendous amount of shit to push across the very narrow borders between Ukraine and Crimea. It was absolutely a gamble on Russia's side to focus so much fighting power in an area where they could bring so little of it effectively to bear, but it did work out. And this concentration of strength is also now going to be the main hurdle that must be overcome. The major formations we know of are the 7th Guards Air Assault Division with at least 1 regiment, the 20th Guards Motorized Rifle Division with at least 2 regiments, the 19th Motorized Rifle Division with 1 regiment, the 42nd Guards Motorized Rifle Division with 1 regiment, and the 150th Motorized Rifle Division with at least 2, possibly 3 regiments. To add on to this, we have 2 elite naval infantry brigades, the 126th Separate Guards Coastal Defense Brigade, and the 810th Separate Naval Infantry Brigade. And don't let the Coastal Defense designation fool you, by the way. This is not a bunch of bunker warmers. Both naval brigades are fully mechanized with tank support and possibly even special forces attachments. And finally, we also have the 11th Separate Guards Air Assault Brigade. Another expected elite brigade, probably operating as a battalion tactical group. When it comes to the Ukrainian side, however, things get very difficult as the fog of war lies thick indeed over the Ukrainian side. We know a fair bit about the Russians since they've been building up their forces for a very long time now, but the Ukrainian side never got the same kind of scrutiny because, well, honestly, pretty much everyone expected them to fold rather rapidly. However, presuming no major movements have occurred, and it is relatively unlikely that they would have happened, then we are looking at the 58th Motorized Brigade, the 28th Mechanized Brigade, and the 17th Tank Brigade, alongside, of course, National Guard troops. These are not exactly ideal attacking numbers, even more so when you remember that you also have to look out for Transnistria to the rear here. Now, I don't believe Transnistria has the organization, the men, or the training to be any kind of real straight-up danger, but should you leave the border completely undefended, the Ukrainian rear and logistics would be exposed to an unacceptable degree of risk, so something will have to be left behind. Preferably National Guard troops or the soon-to-be mobilized reserve, whilst as many brigades as possible should be moved down from Kiev to help out with the offensive. Best case scenario, taking into account the need to protect the Belarusian border with some quality troops, and the need to stiffen up the Donbass front, I would guess another 2, maybe at a stretch 3, and at a real stretch 4 brigades could be sent southwards. Not ideal again, but Ukraine has beaten larger Russian forces with less, even though the quality of those may be somewhat in question. So, how would it be done? Well, it is immediately very tempting indeed to try a drive straight through Ohensky, bypassing Kherson and racing towards Dzhankoi. Sorry for violating all of these names, by the way, to isolate Crimea from the rest of the front. This was a move the Russian army managed in reverse, of course, on day 1 of the invasion, so a blitzing-style assault is far from impossible, but, if successful, would leave the Ukrainian offensive with a dangerously thin needle-point penetration, relying entirely on the M17 highway, while surrounded on damn near every side by elite Russian battalion tactical groups. It's the kind of maneuver that would either go down in history as a brilliantly bold maneuver made by a visionary commander, or as the legacy-shattering retardation of Market Garden. And really, for the reward to be worth the risk of this, you would have to combine it with a second offensive towards Mariupol or the crossroads at Melitopol to deny the Russian forces the ability to just retreat to separatist territory. Furthermore, the main part of the Russian defenders in the south are expected to be around Kherson city, which would make it a very difficult nut to crack, especially in a hurry, and thus will need even more men, and with the second offensive needed on top of that, doubtful and dangerous as any weakening of the Donetsk-Luhansk area in the name of an offensive might be the straw that finally sees the bear trap slam shut. Instead, I would aim further up the mighty Dnieper River to Kozatske and the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, which also serves as a small bridge. This appears to be protected by far fewer Russian troops, maybe just a single brigade, allowing for an opportunity for local superiority in the crucial opening hours of the offensive. Now, the bridge here is nowhere near as large as the Antonovsky Bridge outside of Kherson City, but it might just be enough, as all you would need is a single brigade breaking across it, and this would give access to the Russian forces' rear area, where, as far as we know, there are very few troops. From here, it would be a race with multiple very juicy targets. The T-2202 road, not the biggest, but sufficient for a fast-moving column or two, leads straight to Crimea, as does the P-47 highway, and of course, there is also the M14 running deep into the Russian rear behind the front towards Zaporozhye. This would, in one fell stroke, place elements of the 49th and 58th Combined Armed Armies in the area in a real danger of encirclement and raids to their logistical centers and supply routes. If the response near Kiev is anything to go by, they may very well begin a general retreat, at least from Kherson City, which in turn would offer an excellent opportunity to make an attempt on the Antonovsky Bridge as well, in turn placing the Russian forces north of the river under tremendous pressure to disengage quickly and cleanly, or possibly getting trapped. It is also almost certainly going to force the Russians to respond very quickly and very aggressively, as they are now looking at major formations getting cut off very rapidly, with even just one brigade getting across the Dnieper. They would have to launch counterattacks very quickly, and they would need to get results very quickly as well, yet they don't have a wealth of reserves nearby. And any units moving towards the rear to counter a potential Ukrainian breakout division would have to either be taken away from the area that is pushing towards the Luhansk-Donetsk border, weakening the potential bear trap, and maybe even opening an opportunity for an offensive in that area as well. Not as an opening move, but instead as a possible second stage of the offensive, as any weakening of that part of the front would be a truly mouth-watering opportunity. As a successful Ukrainian offensive towards Melitopol, perhaps even seizing it outright, would almost completely neutralize the danger of the Donetsk-Luhansk pocket forming. But you may also now be wondering where the hell Crimea comes into all of this, as I have barely mentioned it again so far. But the truth is that just like the Ukrainians probably didn't expect an offensive from Crimea due to the extremely challenging terrain, the Ukrainian army's opportunity to retake it would also be limited by those challenges. Right now, as far as we know, there are only 2 bridges left into Crimea, with a third having been heavily damaged on one of the first days of the invasion. There is also a land route along M17 or the T-2202 road I mentioned earlier, but these are all very narrow approaches, and the feasibility of forcing any one of them will depend enormously on the success of the first 24 hours of the offensive. And even if it is a resounding success, it will be a tremendous gamble to send substantial forces that deep into terrain occupied by the enemy with very few good supply routes, all of which might very well have to be wrested from the Russian hands as well. Like I said at the start, it's a risky operation, but even though Crimea would be the crown jewel prize, even just forcing the Russians out of the south of Ukraine, or at least onto the southern side of the Dnieper River, would place Ukraine in a much safer position. As right now, whilst it may have warded off the blow to the head that is Kiev, it still has a dagger pointed at its gut and a bear trap slowly closing around its arm. Nevertheless, though, it is absolutely a very tempting possibility. With a successful enough opening, with ready reserves able to rush across the Dnieper, and with the kind of crazy-ass commander at the head of it, you might just actually be able to reach Crimea from the Dnieper in just a day or two, depending upon how much resistance the Russians have put in reserve. Now, of course, this is also dependent on actually getting across the river to begin with, which might never happen. That one Russian brigade might hold their ground for days, allowing for reinforcements to be moved in. They might have simply mined the ever-loving hell out of the hydroelectric plant and the roadway surface above it, and blow it all to kingdom come before the Ukrainians get within a kilometer of it. But the successful seizure of Crimea, it would be a victory that would dwarf nearly any other. It would be an enormous humiliation, not just for the Russian army, but to Putin personally. It would be a blow to him. That is the important part, because right now, Putin is sitting in a rather precarious position. His reputation as the strong man of Russia is most assuredly under siege. There have been massive protests against him in Russia and in the Kherson region, which I'm suggesting the Ukrainian army assault through. That is another reason why I think this might actually be a potential opportunity, as Russian forces are undoubtedly quite scattered and dispersed dealing with civilian uprisings, which is going to leave them in a less than ideal position to resist any Ukrainian overtures. Not to mention it'll make it very difficult for them to respond rapidly as well. And again, I cannot overstate the potential damage to Putin's reputation. Bearing in mind what kind of a leader Putin is and the kind of leadership Russia has always had. Russia has never had any shortage of ambitious underlings, shall we say, and a weak president might not remain president for long, as indicated by President Biden's speech in Poland that this man cannot remain in power, a statement quickly denounced by the White House. Yet nevertheless, honestly, Ukraine's best chance to avoid a long, grinding, and painful war, which it may very well still lose in the long run, well, like it or not, a sudden change in Russian leadership is probably the best opportunity, because here's the thing. Whilst Ukraine is now getting ready to bring up its reserves, that may very well be a tremendous advantage, and it is gaining enormous international support. The longer this war wears on, the lesser and lesser that support will become. I talked about this in my How Russia Could Win video as a theoretical exercise. If Russia can halt the war, draw it out, make it boring for Western media, stop it with the explosions and all of the crazy stuff, and just turn it into a long, grinding, painful, attritional artillery duel, then the media will grow tired of it, like it does everything else. And as public interest wanes, so will support. And Russia still has crushing superiority in artillery and bombardment capabilities, and in the ability to supply and maintain supplies to these artillery and these guns. They have every possibility to simply hunker down, dig in, and crush one section of Ukraine at a time through overwhelming artillery. I do suggest you go check out my How Russia Could Win video for more details on this, but it would be Russia's best chance. However, it is a very slow solution, a very long-term solution. It may very well be Russia's best chance, but not necessarily Vladimir Putin's best chance. And we'll wrap it up there before I draw too much undue attention from powerful people. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching. If you liked the video, please do consider leaving a thumbs up and a comment, as that is exactly what the YouTube algorithm loves. Have a good day.